They marooned her on a Class-9 as punishment. She sent back a restaurant review. Part 1. The Sentencing. The courtroom floated in the empty space between stars. It was made of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. Thousands of aliens sat in rows that curved upward like the inside of a shell. They had come from 100 different worlds to watch the trial of a single human woman. Stood alone in the center of the room. She was 34 years old, with short black hair and calm dark eyes. Her hands were bound with energy cuffs that hummed quietly. She did not look afraid. This bothered the judges very much. The High Arbiter Hose looked down at her from his floating platform. He was which meant he had gray skin, 4 arms, and a face like a disappointed fish. His species ruled this part of the galaxy. They believed themselves to be the most civilized beings in existence. They did not like humans. Of Earth, Hose said, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber. You stand accused of crimes against diplomatic harmony. You have shamed the hegemony. You have insulted Ambassador Osh at a state dinner attended by representatives of 47 species. How do you answer? Tilted her head. I told him his wine was actually cleaning fluid. I was being helpful. A gasp went through the crowd. The in the audience turned darker shades of gray, which meant they were angry. You drank the sacred ceremonial wine of our people, Hose continued, and you called it, and I quote, surprisingly drinkable for something that could strip paint off a shuttle. It was a compliment, said. I finished the whole glass. That wine was 4,000 years old. That explains the aftertaste. Hose gripped the edge of his platform so hard that his 4 hands turned white. Behind, a small group of human diplomats sat with their heads in their hands. They had tried to warn her. They had begged her to apologize, but had never apologized for anything in her life, and she was not going to start now. The truth was simple. At the state dinner, Ambassador Osh had bragged for 2 hours about his ancient ceremonial wine. He said it was made from fruits that no longer existed. He said only the most refined palates could appreciate it. He said humans could never understand such sophisticated flavors. So had asked for a taste, and her survival training had kicked in immediately. The wine was not wine. It was a fermented chemical compound that the digestive system could process, but that would kill most other species. The ambassador had been serving poison and calling it culture. When pointed this out, she had expected gratitude. Instead, she got arrested. They did not like being corrected by humans. They especially did not like being corrected by human women who smiled while doing it. The court has reached a decision, Hose announced. The crystal walls hummed with energy. For your crimes against the hegemony, you are sentenced to exile. You will be transported to planet XR7749, where you will remain for the rest of your natural life. The crowd murmured. Someone laughed. It was not a kind laugh. Had heard of XR7749. Everyone had. It was a Class-9 on the Galactic Danger Scale. The scale only went to 10, and 10 was reserved for planets that were literally balls of fire. Class-9 meant something was very, very wrong with a world. In the case of XR7749, many things were wrong. The atmosphere was toxic, the rain was acid, the plants ate meat, the animals were worse than the plants. The ground itself was unstable, full of volcanic vents and sudden sinkholes. No one had ever survived there for more than a few days. They had tried to colonize it once, 200 years ago. They sent 1,000 settlers. None came back. You are sending me to die, said. It was not a question. We are sending you to justice, Hose replied, but his thin lips curled in what might have been a smile. The hegemony is merciful. We do not execute criminals, we simply relocate them to a planet where everything wants to kill me. The universe is full of challenges. Perhaps you will find this one educational. Looked at the High Arbiter for a long moment. Then she did something that no one expected. She laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and genuine, and it echoed through the crystal chamber like music. "What is amusing?" Hose demanded. "You," said, "all of you. You think you're giving me a death sentence. You think I'm going to land on that planet and die screaming within a day." She shook her head. "You have no idea what humans are." "We know exactly what humans are. You are a young species, primitive, aggressive. You have only been in space for 300 years. "That's true," agreed. "But do you know what Earth is classified as?" Hose blinked his large, wet eyes. "What?" "Earth, check its classification." One of the junior judges pulled up a holographic display. His face went pale, which for a minute it went from gray to almost white. Class 6, he stammered. "Earth is a Class 6. The crowd went silent. 70% of our surface is covered in a substance that will kill you if you breathe it," said cheerfully. "We have thousands of species of venomous animals. Our plants produce chemicals that can stop your heart. We have storms that can flatten cities, earthquakes that swallow buildings, and volcanoes that can block out the sun. We have diseases that have killed millions of us. And you know what we did?" No one answered. "We thrived, we built civilizations, we went to space, we're still here," smiled at Hose, and there was something in that smile that made even the High Arbiter feel cold. "You're not sending me to die, Arbiter, you're sending me home." The guards came to take her away. As they led her toward the drop pod that would carry her to XR7749, she called back over her shoulder. "At least pack me a notebook. I'm going to want to take notes." Hose watched her go. He told himself that she was bluffing. He told himself that no one could survive XR7749. He told himself that in a week, maybe two, the human would be dead and forgotten. But somewhere deep in his four-chambered heart, he felt something he had not felt in centuries. Doubt. The drop pod launched an hour later. Watched through the small viewport as the crystal courthouse grew smaller and smaller until it was just another star in the darkness. Then she turned to look at her destination. XR7749 grew larger in the viewport. It was a purple and green world wrapped in angry clouds. Lightning flickered across its surface like veins of fire. Even from orbit, she could see the massive storms that never stopped moving. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was going to try very hard to kill her. Smiled and opened her notebook. "Day 1, she wrote. "Arrived at new home, looks interesting. Will report back with findings." The drop pod hit the atmosphere, and the world turned to fire around her. She did not stop smiling. They marooned her on a Class 9 as punishment. She sent back a restaurant review. Part 2, First Contact with the Menu. The drop pod crashed into the purple mud and slid for nearly 100 meters before stopping. Warning lights flashed red. Alarms screamed. Smoke filled the tiny cabin. Kicked open the emergency hatch and rolled out into her new home. The air hit her immediately. It burned her nose and throat like she was breathing hot peppers. Her eyes watered. Her skin tingled where the atmosphere touched it. A normal person would have panicked. Just pulled her shirt up over her nose and started walking toward a rock formation in the distance. The ground squished under her feet. It was not solid ground but some kind of living moss that pulsed with dim light. When she stepped on it, it made a sound like a sad wail. She kept walking. She had maybe 20 minutes before the atmosphere did real damage to her lungs. She needed shelter. She needed to filter the air somehow. She needed water that would not melt her insides. She found all three in a cave. The rock formation was actually the skeleton of something enormous that had died long ago. Its ribs curved up toward the sky like the frame of a cathedral. Between the ribs, the rock had formed into a natural shelter. Inside, the air was different. Still bad, but not as bad. Something about the bone material filtered out the worst of the toxins. Sat down and started taking notes. Hour 1, she wrote. Atmosphere is acidic but survivable, similar to industrial pollution on Earth. Grandmother lived in old Beijing for 60 years, breathing worse than this. Found shelter in giant skeleton. Previous occupant was very large and very dead. We'll call him, thank you. She spent the first night awake, listening to the sounds outside. Things moved in the darkness. Big things. They made noises that sounded like screaming mixed with grinding metal. Once, something enormous walked past the skeleton, and the ground shook with each step. Held very still and did not breathe until it passed. By morning, she had made a plan. The first 3 days were about survival. She explored the area around skeleton, always staying close enough to run back if needed. She found a stream of water that was only mildly acidic. She could filter it through her shirt and some of the calcium from bones. It tasted terrible, but it did not kill her. She found plants. Most of them tried to eat her. There was a type of flower she named the terror orchid that shot poisonous darts when anything came close. There were vines that moved like snakes and tried to wrap around her legs. There was a bush that screamed when touched, which attracted predators, which then ate whatever had touched the bush. Evolution on this planet was creative and mean, but was also creative, and she was very, very stubborn. On the second day, she caught one of the terror orchid's darts in her hand. It hurt. It hurt a lot. Her whole arm went numb for 6 hours, but she noticed something interesting. The numbness was not just painful, it was useful. When she accidentally cut herself later, the area near the dart wound did not hurt at all. Note, she wrote, terror orchid toxin is a paralytic, causes numbness. Possible use as painkiller if diluted. Will experiment, probably will not die, probably. She experimented, she did not die. By the 3rd day, she had created a paste made from terror orchid toxin mixed with her own saliva that could numb small areas of skin. She used it when a creature she named bit her leg. That was exactly what it sounded like. It was a shark that lived on land. It had fins that worked like legs, rows of teeth that never stopped growing, and absolutely no fear. It also discovered tasted delicious. She had killed it with a sharpened rib bone from. Then she had looked at its body and thought about all the survival training she had received on Earth. They always said the same thing. Find food, any food. Protein was protein. She built a fire using volcanic vents she found nearby. The vents released hot gas from deep underground. With some rocks arranged correctly, she could channel the heat to cook with. The meat was tough but flavorful. It reminded her of alligator mixed with tuna. The texture was dense. The fat rendered out nicely over the heat. She added some of the acidic water as a kind of marinade, and the acid actually tenderized the meat. Day 3 dinner, she wrote in her notebook. Steak grilled over volcanic vent. Meat is firm with good chew. Flavor is ocean-like but earthier. Acid marinade was a good choice. Would benefit from salt. Must find salt. Rating 6/10. Room for improvement. She was not just surviving anymore. She was cooking. On day 4, she discovered they were the size of her head. They had shells that glowed blue and green in the darkness. According to the planetary survey data in her drop pod's computer, they were extremely venomous and should be avoided at all costs. The survey said they attacked anything that moved. Watched them for an hour. They did not attack her. They only attacked things that attacked them first. When she sat still and quiet, they ignored her completely. When she threw them a piece of meat, they gathered around it and ate peacefully. She watched how they moved. She watched how they ate. She noticed that after eating, they produced a sticky substance that glowed even brighter than their shells. They used it to build their nests. It looked like honey. I am going to regret this, she said out loud. Then she reached out very slowly and touched the glowing substance. It was honey, or something very much like it, sweet and thick and warm. It tingled on her tongue. She did not die. She did not even get sick. Day 4, she wrote, her hand shaking slightly with excitement. Discovery: honey is edible, tastes like honey mixed with flowers and electricity. Tingling sensation is pleasant. This changes everything. That night she roasted over her volcanic vent. The shell cracked in the heat and released steam that smelled like the ocean. Inside, the meat was white and soft, like lobster or crab. The bioluminescence faded as it cooked, but the flavor only got better. It was buttery. It was rich. It was the best thing she had eaten since arriving on this planet. She ate it with terror orchid paste as a numbing sauce, because why not? Roasted, she wrote. Exterior, satisfying crunch like softshell crab. Interior, buttery sweet with hints of honey and something like truffle. Loses points for the screaming sound it makes while cooking. 710. Would eat again. Will eat again. She looked up at the sky. The clouds had parted briefly and she could see stars. Somewhere up there they thought she was dying. They thought she was suffering. They thought their punishment was destroying her. She took another bite of perfectly roasted and smiled. A shadow passed overhead. Something massive. Something with wings that blocked out the stars. It made a sound like thunder mixed with a predator's roar, and the ground beneath her shook. Looked up at the apex predator of XR7749. It was beautiful and terrible, with scales that shimmered purple and black, and eyes that glowed like molten gold. It was looking right at her. Any sane person would have run. Any sane person would have hidden. Any sane person would have been terrified. Looked at the monster and thought, I wonder what you taste like. She wrote in her notebook, Day 4, found the main course. Now I just need to figure out how to cook it. The creature roared again and flew away into the night. Finished her and started planning. They marooned her on a Class-9 as punishment. She sent back a restaurant review. Part 3. The ecosystem is a kitchen. 3 months passed on XR7749. High above the planet, a monitoring satellite recorded something impossible. The human was still alive. Not only alive, but building. The thermal sensors showed heat signatures that meant fire, structures, and movement patterns that suggested organization rather than desperate survival. Officer Ash stared at the data and felt his stomach turn cold. This cannot be correct, he said to his assistant. Run the scan again. They ran the scan again. The results were the same. The human had built a settlement inside the giant skeleton. She had created walls using bones and some kind of natural cement. She had dug irrigation channels for water. She had cleared areas that looked almost like gardens. She had farms on a Class-9. The human had farms. Should we report this to High Command? The assistant asked. Ash thought about what would happen when the High Arbiter learned that his perfect punishment had failed. He thought about how angry the ambassador would be. He thought about his career. Let us wait, he said. She will die eventually, they always do. But had no plans to die. She had been busy. The first month was about survival. The second month was about comfort. The third month was about something else entirely. The third month was about cooking. Her notebook had grown thick with entries. She had learned which plants were poisonous and which were just spicy. She had discovered that the acid rain, when filtered through bones, made an excellent vinegar. She had found salt deposits near the volcanic vents. She had domesticated a small herd of that followed her around like glowing puppies. And she had finally figured out the nightmare wyvern. That was what she called the apex predator. It was 30 meters long with wings that could block out the sun. It hunted by dropping from the clouds and grabbing anything that moved. It could bite through solid rock. Its claws could cut through hide like paper. It was, by any reasonable measure, the most dangerous thing on the planet. It also had one weakness. It was curious. Nightmare wyverns did not just hunt. They investigated. When they saw something new, they circled it first. They studied it. They tried to figure out what it was before deciding whether to eat it. Used this. She had spent weeks preparing. She built a trap using vines and bones and a very large amount of honey as bait. She had prepared a poison made from concentrated terror orchid toxin. She had sharpened bones into spears that could pierce even wyvern scales if thrown hard enough. The hunt took 3 days. The first day, the wyvern found her trap but did not enter it. The second day, it circled closer, drawn by the honey smell. The third day, it finally landed to investigate. Strug. The battle was not elegant. It was messy and loud and terrifying. The wyvern roared, screamed. The ground shook. At one point, she was hanging from the creature's neck, stabbing it with a bone knife while it tried to throw her off. She won. The wyvern's body was too large to move. She had to butcher it where it fell. This took 2 days. The scales she kept for armor. The bones she kept for tools. The meat she preserved using salt and smoke. And then she cooked some. Day 89, she wrote, her hands still shaking. Nightmare wyvern steak, cooked over volcanic vent with acid rain vinegar and terror orchid rub. The meat is incredibly tender, rich fat content. Reminds me of Wagyu beef but with a mineral quality like the creature absorbed the metals from the soil. The terror of hunting it adds to the flavor somehow. 9-10. Lost 1 point because it almost killed me. Would hunt again. She was not alone anymore. During her second month, she had discovered the moss goblins. They were small creatures, about the size of cats, made entirely of fungus. They had large eyes and tiny hands, and they communicated in squeaks and whistles. They were the only semi-intelligent species on the planet. At first, they were terrified of her. She was big and loud, and she killed things that the moss goblins had spent their entire evolutionary history running from. They watched her from a distance, hiding in the shadows, never getting close. Then she cooked for them. She had left out a plate of roasted near their hiding spot, just left it there and walked away. The next morning the plate was empty. She left another plate. Same result. On the 7th day, a single moss goblin approached her while she was cooking. It squeaked at her. She squeaked back. Neither of them understood the other, but it did not matter. Food was a universal language. Within a month, the moss goblins were living in her settlement. They were surprisingly helpful. Their tiny hands were perfect for detailed work. They could reach places she could not. They knew which plants were safe and which were deadly. They showed her where to find fresh water and how to avoid the worst predators. In exchange, she fed them. She cooked for them. She shared her fire and her shelter and her strange human knowledge. Day 92, she wrote. The moss goblins have names now. The leader is called Squeak. His second in command is Whistle. The small one who follows me everywhere is Tiny. They are learning to help with food preparation. Tiny is very good with knife work. Note to self, never make Tiny angry. Her journal had become something more than a survival log. It was a cookbook, a guide to every edible thing on XR7749. She had recipes for 17 different creatures. She had fermentation projects using cave fungus and honey. She had created a drink she called Regret, because that was what you felt the morning after drinking it. Regret, her notes read, made from fermented cave fungus, honey, and acid rain vinegar, tastes like sake mixed with paint thinner. 3 cups and you feel invincible. 4 cups and you fight it with your bare hands. 5 cups and you win. Do not drink 5 cups unless emergency, or unless bored. On day 100, she made a decision. The drop pod's emergency beacon could be modified. She had studied engineering on Earth. She knew how radio waves worked. With some adjustments, she could turn the distress signal into something else. A broadcast, a message that would reach the galactic network. She could tell everyone what she had done. She could tell everyone what was possible on this planet that they had given up on. She could share her recipes, her knowledge, her discovery. She could write a restaurant review. They wanted to kill me with this planet, she said to Squeak, who was sitting on her shoulder eating a piece of dried wyvern meat. But this planet is not a death sentence. It is a gift, the greatest kitchen in the galaxy, and they just handed it to me. Squeak squeaked in agreement, or maybe he just wanted more meat. It was hard to tell. Started writing. The transmission took 3 weeks to prepare. She had to get everything right. The recipes, the survival tips, the descriptions, and most importantly, the tone. She was not going to beg for rescue. She was not going to complain about her treatment. She was going to make them look like fools. On day 121, she activated the beacon. The message shot out into space, carrying her words to every corner of the galaxy. And everything changed. They marooned her on a Class-9 as punishment. She sent back a restaurant review. Part 4. The review heard across the galaxy. The message arrived at the Galactic Communications Hub at exactly 1400 Standard Time. A junior technician named was the first to see it. She read the header, blinked, read it again, and then called her supervisor. Her supervisor called his supervisor. Within an hour, the message had reached the highest levels of the government. Within a day, it had leaked to the public. Within a week, it was the most shared document in galactic history. The message was formatted as a formal review, submitted according to the official standards of the Galactic Restaurant Guide. It followed every rule perfectly. It was polite. It was professional. It was absolutely devastating. The review spread across the network like fire across dry grass. News programs discussed it. Social media exploded with reactions. Every species with access to a data terminal was reading the words of. Her review read: XR7749, the dining experience, 4 out of 5 stars. The is what I would describe as primal nightmare. The sky is often purple. The clouds produce acid rain. The wildlife screams constantly. I found this charming after the first few weeks. The bioluminescent lighting during storm season is genuinely beautiful. I have removed 1 star because my server tried to eat me on arrival. This was rude. Cuisine. The local ingredients are exceptional. The Nightmare Wyvern offers meat comparable to the finest Wagyu beef, with additional mineral notes from the local soil. The is a revelation, similar to lobster but with a honey sweetness that must be tasted to be believed. The Terror Orchid, properly prepared, adds a numbing spice that enhances any dish. I have included 17 original recipes for any species brave enough to visit. Service. This is a self-service establishment. You must hunt, kill, and prepare your own food. You must find your own water and build your own shelter. The local moss goblins are helpful once befriended. Bring weapons. Bring fire. Bring determination. Drinks. I have invented a local specialty called Regret. It is made from fermented cave fungus and honey. It will change your life. It may also end your life if consumed in excess. Please drink responsibly. Overall, I was sent to this planet to die. The hegemony believed that XR7749 would kill me within days. They were incorrect. Instead, I have eaten better here than at any 5-star establishment in the core worlds. The ambassador who sentenced me clearly has no appreciation for adventure dining. This is understandable. His species considers fermented cleaning solvent to be fine wine. I highly recommend this destination for thrill seekers and humans. Other species should consider bringing a human guide. Chef, Exile in Residence. The recipes were attached, all 17 of them. Each one was detailed, practical, and written with dark humor. The steak recipe included the note, "Catch your carefully. They are fast and angry. If the catches you instead, this recipe will not help." The survival tips were disguised as cooking instructions. How to filter water was explained as preparing the base for your acid vinegar. How to build shelter was described as setting up your kitchen properly. How to avoid the worst predators was listed under ingredients to avoid. It was brilliant. It was insulting. It was the greatest act of revenge the galaxy had ever seen. The government responded with fury. High Arbiter Hose called an emergency session and demanded that the transmission be blocked. But it was too late. The message had already spread too far. Every attempt to suppress it only made more people want to read it. She was supposed to die. Hose shouted at his advisors. She was supposed to suffer and die alone, and instead she sends us a restaurant review. She also rated us 3 stars for hospitality, one advisor said quietly. She said our drop pod was uncomfortable. Hose looked like he might explode. On Earth, the reaction was very different. Humans had always known they were considered strange by galactic standards. They came from a dangerous planet. They ate things other species considered poison. They survived in conditions that would kill most sentient beings. But they had never had proof that this made them special. Until now. Became a hero overnight. Her face appeared on news programs across human space. Her recipes were shared millions of times. Children dressed as her for holidays. Someone wrote a song about her that became the most popular music in the sector. But more importantly, humans started asking questions. If could survive on a Class-9, what else could they do? If they were wrong about XR7749, what else were they wrong about? How many other planets had been abandoned because other species could not handle them? The human government made a formal request to send a ship to XR7749. They refused. The humans asked again. They refused again. So the humans stopped asking. The ship left Earth space 3 months after its transmission. It was not a military vessel. It was not an official government ship. It was a civilian transport owned by a restaurant company, filled with supplies, equipment, and volunteers. They detected it entering their space and demanded it turn back. The ship's captain, a woman named Maria Santos, sent a simple reply. "We are making a delivery. Please do not interfere." They sent warships to intercept. The human ship did not slow down. For 3 days the galaxy watched as the confrontation unfolded. They threatened. The humans ignored them. They aimed weapons. The humans kept flying. Finally, the High Council made a decision. They could destroy the human ship. They had the power to do it. But the whole galaxy was watching. Every species with a data terminal was following the story. If they killed civilians for trying to visit a planet, they would look like monsters. If they let the humans pass, they would look weak. They chose to look weak. The human ship entered orbit around XR7749 on day 201 of its exile. She watched it descend through the purple clouds, a silver shape against the endless storms. She stood outside Skeleton with Squeak on her shoulder and Tiny holding her hand, and she waited. The ship landed 100 meters from her settlement. The door opened. Maria Santos walked out, took a deep breath of the acidic air, coughed once, and then smiled. "Chef," she said, "we brought supplies and a film crew and a job offer." Looked at the ship. She looked at the crates being unloaded. She looked at the people who had crossed the galaxy because of a restaurant review. "What kind of job offer?" she asked. "Earth wants to open a restaurant here, the first human establishment on a, and they want you to run it." Was quiet for a long moment. Behind her, the moss goblins peeked out from the settlement, curious about the new arrivals. In the distance, a nightmare wyvern roared. "I have conditions," finally said. "Name them." "My staff stays, Squeak and Tiny and all the moss goblins. They help me survive. They get jobs." Maria nodded. "Done. The menu is mine. I decide what we serve and how we serve it." "Of course. And I want a message sent to High Arbiter Hose, a personal invitation to our opening night." Maria grinned. "What should the invitation say?" Smiled the smile that had frightened thee in their own courtroom, the smile that said she was not just surviving, she was winning. "Tell him that Chef requests the pleasure of his company at the Marooning, the galaxy's dining experience. Tell him the dress code is formal. Tell him reservations are required." She paused. "And tell him to bring his appetite." They marooned her on a Class-9 as punishment. She sent back a restaurant review. Part 5, Reservations Required. 1 year after was dropped onto XR7749 to die, the planet had a new name. The humans called its landing, and they hated that name with every fiber of their being. But there was nothing they could do about it. The name had spread across the galaxy. Maps were being updated. Travel guides were being written. The planet itself had not changed at all. It was still Class 9. The atmosphere was still toxic. The rain was still acid. The still hunted anything that moved. The nightmare wyvern still ruled the skies. Every single thing that had made this world a death sentence was exactly the same. What had changed was how people saw it. The Marooning opened for business on the anniversary of exile. It was built into and around skeleton, the bones now reinforced with metal and glass. They formed a natural dome over the main dining room. Bioluminescent plants provided soft lighting. Volcanic vents powered the kitchen. The view through the glass walls showed the endless purple storms outside. The waiting list was 6 months long. Guests arrived by shuttle, landing on a platform built from nightmare wyvern bones. Before they could enter the restaurant, they had to complete a 3-day survival course. They learned how to filter water. They learned which plants would kill them and which would only make them wish they were dead. They learned how to spot a before it spotted them. The course had a 9% failure rate. This did not reduce the number of reservations. If anything, it increased them. Inside the restaurant had created something the galaxy had never seen. The tables were made from polished bone. The chairs were cushioned with nightmare wyvern leather. The plates were carved from volcanic rock. Everything came from the planet. Everything told a story. The menu was 17 pages long, and every dish was a miracle. The most popular item was the nightmare wyvern tartare. Raw wyvern meat, cut very thin, served with terror orchid oil and honey. It melted on the tongue. It tasted like victory. The second most popular item was regret. Had refined the recipe over the past year. It was still dangerous. It was still probably illegal in several systems. It was also the most requested drink in the galaxy. The staff were mostly human volunteers who had come with the first ship, but the kitchen was run by moss goblins. Squeak was the head sous chef. Tiny was in charge of all knife work. Whistle managed the prep station. They wore tiny chef hats that had made for them, and they took their jobs very seriously. The mortality rate for diners was 0.3%. This was actually lower than several fusion restaurants in the core worlds. Kept this statistic on a sign near the entrance. It was petty. She did not care. On the night of the anniversary celebration, the restaurant was full. Celebrities had come from across the galaxy. Humans had traveled from Earth and every colony world. News crews filmed everything. The galaxy was watching. And in the corner, at a small table reserved under a false name, sat High Arbiter Hose. He had made his reservation 8 months ago. He had used the name of a minor trade official. He had traveled in secret, telling no one where he was going. He wore plain clothes instead of his judicial robes. He looked, for the first time in his long life, like nobody important. Spotted him within 5 minutes of his arrival. Of course she did. She had been waiting for this moment for a year. She did not rush. She served her other guests. She checked on the kitchen. She made sure everything was perfect. And then, when the tasting menu reached its midpoint, she walked to Ho's table and sat down across from him. "Arbiter," she said, "you came." Hose looked at her. He looked at the restaurant around them. He looked at the storm raging outside the windows and the moss goblins carrying plates and the humans laughing at their tables. "I had to see it," he admitted. His voice was quiet. "I had to know if it was real." And he did not answer immediately. In front of him sat the remains of 5 courses. The bisque, the terror orchid salad, the volcanic roasted vegetables, the nightmare wyvern medallions with cave mushroom reduction. He had eaten every bite. "It is the best meal I have ever had," he said finally. In 400 years of life, nothing has compared, nothing has come close. Nodded, she had expected this. The food spoke for itself. I sentenced you to death, Hose continued. I stood in that courtroom and I condemned you to die on this planet, and I smiled when I did it. I wanted you to suffer. I wanted to prove that humans were nothing special. I wanted to watch you fail. I know. Are you not angry? Considered the question. She thought about that day in the crystal courtroom. She thought about the drop pod screaming through toxic atmosphere. She thought about the first night in Skeleton, listening to monsters hunt in the darkness, wondering if she would live to see morning. She thought about Squeak and Tiny and Whistle. She thought about her first successful hunt. She thought about the restaurant she had built from nothing. Angry, she shook her head. Arbiter, your people tried to kill me with a planet. Instead, you gave me the greatest kitchen in the galaxy. She stood and gestured to a server. A new plate arrived. It was the dessert course. A delicate construction of honey mousse, terror orchid crystals, and something that looked like spun gold. The only tragedy, said, is that you did not maroon me somewhere with real challenges. Hose stared at her. Then, despite himself, he laughed. It was a small laugh, barely more than a breath, but it was real. It was the first time he had laughed in decades. You are terrifying, he said. Your entire species is terrifying. We have traveled the stars for 10,000 years. We have conquered worlds and built empires. We thought we understood the universe. He picked up his fork and took a bite of the dessert. His eyes closed. For a moment, he looked almost peaceful. We understood nothing, he said. We looked at death and saw an ending. You looked at death and saw dinner. Smiled, we are human. We come from a world that tried to kill us for 1,000,000 years. We evolved being chased by predators and poisoned by plants and burned by our own sun. And we survived. We did not just survive. We thrived. She leaned forward. You do not defeat us by making things harder. You just make us more creative. You want to know the secret of humanity. It is not that we are strong. It is not that we are smart. It is that we refuse to accept limits. We see the impossible and we think, yes, but what if I tried anyway? Outside, lightning split the purple sky. A nightmare wyvern roared somewhere in the distance. The acid rain hammered against the glass walls. Inside there was warmth, there was light, there was the smell of good food and the sound of happy people. Hose finished his dessert. He set down his fork. He looked at the woman he had tried to destroy, and he saw something he had never expected. He saw someone who had won. What will you do next? He asked. You have conquered this world. You have built something impossible. What challenge is left for you? Glanced toward the window. Beyond the storms of landing, beyond the stars, there were other worlds, other planets classified as death sentences, other places where the and other species had given up. There are 17 Class 9 worlds in the galaxy, she said, and 3 Class 10 worlds. No one has ever survived on any of them. She turned back to Hose. I wonder what their local cuisine is like. Hose felt a chill run down his spine. He realized in that moment that the universe had changed, not because of politics or war or any grand historical force. It had changed because one human woman had refused to die quietly. And now there were more like her, thousands of them, millions of them. All across the galaxy, humans were looking at impossible places and asking, what if we tried anyway? They had tried to make an example of. They had succeeded. Just not in the way they intended. May I have another glass of regret? Hose asked. Poured it herself. To the future, she said, raising her own glass. To the future, Hose agreed. Whatever terrifying thing you humans make it. They drank. Outside, the storm continued. The predators hunted. The planet remained as deadly as it had ever been. Inside the marooning, Chef smiled and began planning her next adventure. She was human. She came from a world of monsters. and she was just getting started.